Rain hammered the windshield as tires hissed against the curb. The door swung wide and Emma stumbled out, breath caught in her throat. Her phone buzzed with a text she never expected to see. A photo glowed on the screen like a flare in fog. Daniel stood beside a smiling woman, holding a small boy. They looked like a family framed for a holiday card. Emma's mind skidded and refused to stop. Emma said, "Tell me this is a joke." No answer came, only thunder rolling down the street. Headlights slid across puddles like knives. Daniel lifted his eyes across the avenue and froze. Emma felt the night split in two. Daniel said, "You should not be here." The words landed heavier than the rain. Somewhere a siren wailed and then faded. Emma tasted metal and fury. She took one step forward, then another, refusing to blink. Morning scraped across the blinds like a dull blade. Coffee went cold, while the house hummed with lies. Emma replayed last night until the edges cut her fingers. Daniel sat at the table as if gravity pinned him there. Daniel said, "We should talk." She measured the distance between them and found a canyon. The photo burned behind her eyelids like lightning afterimages. Emma said, "How long have you been walking 2 streets at once?" Silence wore his face like a mask. A clock clicked too loudly on the wall. A neighbor laughed outside and it sounded cruel. Daniel said, "It is complicated." She traced a coffee ring with a steady hand. She felt steadier than the earth deserved. She would name the storm before it named her. The first lie cracked like thin ice. He called it a business dinner that ran late. She remembered the scent of a different perfume on his collar. Emma said, "You were in a place where no one knew you." Daniel looked at the floor as if it held an answer. The refrigerator hummed like a warning. He reached for words and found dust. Daniel said, "I was trying to keep things from colliding." Emma pictured 2 calendars kissing in secret. She felt heat rise and then cool to iron. She thought of the boy's yellow raincoat. She counted the times he missed bedtime stories. Daniel said, "I did not mean to hurt you." Intent meant nothing to the broken glass. Emma opened the drawer where letters slept. Receipts told truths in faded ink. A key she did not recognize winked like a dare. Emma said, "Where does this open?" Daniel closed his eyes and time thickened. He swallowed and did not answer. The air felt heavier than furniture. A sparrow chattered outside as if mocking the room. Emma said, "I will find the door myself." She placed the key on the table like a verdict. Daniel said, "Please give me a day." A day had already done too much. The house seemed to lean away from him. The silence returned and pulled up a chair. The voicemail waited like a coiled wire. She pressed play and heard Olivia's breath before words formed. Olivia said, "Emma, you need to see me now." The tone carried apology and warning in equal measure. Emma felt the floor shift again. The city outside revved to life, and she matched its pace. She grabbed her coat and left Daniel with the ghosts. Daniel said, "Do not go to her." Control had lost its grip. Emma said, "You lost that vote." She locked the door because rituals help wounds breathe. The hallway light flickered and steadied. She took the stairs 2 at a time. She would not be the last to know. Emma walked into the cafe where Olivia waited with her hands wrapped around a chipped mug. The air smelled of burnt espresso and rain-soaked coats. Olivia's eyes carried guilt heavier than steam. Olivia said, "You deserve the truth." Emma steadied herself, bracing for the blow that words often delivered sharper than knives. She leaned forward and whispered, "Say it." The cafe chatter muffled into silence, though voices swirled. Olivia said, "He has another home, another woman, another child." The syllables detonated like glass shattering across her ribs. Emma's breath caught and the cup shook in her hand. She remembered the photo, and now the puzzle locked into place. Emma said, "How long?" Olivia's lips trembled. Olivia said, "Years, Emma, years." Outside, buses roared and horns blared, but inside time stilled into a prison of betrayal. Emma's mind reeled as she walked back to the street, air biting like cold steel. She thought of Daniel reading bedtime stories, while another child heard the same words across town. Emma said, every smile was borrowed. Her hands clenched the strap of her bag, grounding her. Cars rushed past like fragments of her heart breaking into traffic. She stopped under a streetlight where shadows stretched long. She whispered to herself, I am not the one who failed. The words felt foreign but necessary. A woman hurried past, glancing but not stopping. Emma stared up at the city skyline as if its lights could hold her steady. She would not collapse here, not where strangers walked by blind. She pressed her back against the cold brick wall, fighting the quake inside her chest. Emma returned home and found Daniel waiting in the living room. His face carried shadows deeper than the room itself. Daniel said, You spoke to her. Emma dropped her keys onto the table like thunder. She said, I know about them, all of it. His lips parted, but nothing coherent formed. The clock on the mantel ticked like a judge's gavel. Emma's chest burned with fury, wrapped in grief. Daniel said, I never wanted you to find out this way. Emma laughed hollow, the sound scraping the walls. She said, There was no right way to betray me. Silence hung till it cracked into fragments, neither could gather. He reached toward her, but she stepped back. The gulf between them widened into something no bridge could cross. Emma's friend Sarah arrived after Emma's call, carrying warmth in a storm. Sarah said, Tell me everything. Emma recounted the truth spilled at the cafe, each word stabbing twice. Once in memory, once in voice. Sarah's eyes flashed anger but softened with compassion. Sarah said, You are not broken. He is. Emma felt her chest ease slightly under the weight of another's belief. The room's silence thickened with the unspoken. Emma said, I do not know who I am in this story anymore. Sarah gripped her hand tightly, anchoring her in a sea of unraveling. Sarah said, You are the one who will rise when the dust clears. The words lit a fragile candle in Emma's darkness. Night draped itself like heavy cloth. Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling while the clock pulsed with merciless rhythm. She heard Daniel moving in another room, pacing like a caged animal. Emma whispered into the dark, Why was I not enough? No answer came, only the creak of floorboards. She rolled onto her side and clutched the pillow as though it could fight loneliness. Outside, rain returned, tapping the window like persistent memory. Emma said softly, I will not drown in your lies. Her voice carried to no one but herself. Yet even in the solitude, she felt the first thread of strength weaving into her chest. She closed her eyes not to escape but to gather fire for tomorrow. Emma sat at the desk with her laptop open, fingers trembling above the keys. She had spent the morning combing through bank statements that whispered secrets in numbers. Transfers she never knew about painted a hidden story. Emma said, You built a life in shadows. The glow of the screen reflected her clenched jaw. Her chest ached as she scrolled further, each line slicing another piece of trust away. Daniel's footsteps echoed down the hall, but she did not flinch. She whispered to herself, I will not look away. The house felt colder than its walls. Betrayal was not only a wound but a map, and every route led to a locked door. Emma said, And I will find the key to everyone. The silence that followed was louder than thunder. Daniel entered quietly, his shoulders heavy, his face drawn into lines he could not hide. Daniel said, Emma, let me explain. Emma lifted her eyes, steel replacing tears. She said, Explain how a family can be hidden like a receipt in a drawer. He flinched at her words, as though struck. He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding her gaze. Daniel said, I was afraid of losing everything. Emma laughed sharp and cold. She said, You already did. The room shrank under the weight of their silence. Shadows from the blinds carved bars across Daniel's face like a prisoner caught in his own lies. He sat down, but the distance between them was a canyon. Later, Emma walked with Sarah along a quiet park path, autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet. The trees stood bare against a gray sky. Emma said, "I do not even know what parts of my life were real." Sarah touched her arm, grounding her. Sarah said, "The love you gave was real, even if his was counterfeit." Emma's throat tightened at the word counterfeit. She stared at a family in the distance, children laughing without care. Emma whispered, "They are innocent, yet he chose to fracture us all." Sarah nodded with a sorrowful sigh. The wind carried their silence like brittle leaves tumbling away. Emma returned home to find Daniel pacing the kitchen, his fists opening and closing. Daniel said, "You talked to Sarah again?" His voice cracked under strain. Emma placed her bag down and met his eyes. She said, "You fear the truth being spoken aloud." He stepped closer, anger smoldering beneath guilt. Daniel said, "You are tearing us apart." Emma laughed bitterly. She said, "No, Daniel, you did that with every secret you buried." The refrigerator hummed loudly in the tense air. Their words clashed like storms colliding, and neither stepped back. That night, Emma sat alone in the bedroom, her journal open across her lap. The pen hovered above the page, then she began to write. Her words poured like bloodletting. Emma wrote, "He fractured the vows, but I will not let him fracture me." She paused, staring at the ink that marked her survival more than her sorrow. The act of writing steadied her pulse. She closed the journal and placed it gently on the nightstand, as if sealing away a piece of pain. Emma whispered, "Tomorrow, I start again, even if my world is ash." Her voice was soft, but it held the promise of endurance. Emma stood frozen as her phone rang again, Olivia's name blazing across the screen. She answered with trembling hands, her heart braced for more wounds. Olivia said, "Emma, there is something else you need to know." The voice cracked with a weight that nearly broke the air. Emma pressed the phone hard to her ear, her stomach churning. Olivia continued, "Daniel did not just hide us, he married me too, legally." The world tilted, walls bending under betrayal, heavier than bone. Emma said, "That cannot be true." But even as she said it, she knew. Memories folded in on themselves, her vows burning as paper in flame. The silence between breaths was louder than any scream. Emma met Sarah in the park again, her voice raw as she spoke. Emma said, "He has 2 wives, 2 families, and I was blind." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, eyes filling with fire and sorrow. Sarah said, "Emma, this is beyond betrayal. It is a crime." Emma's voice cracked but held firm. "Everything I believed about my life was counterfeit." Sarah pulled her into an embrace, grounding her as the world tried to spin away. Emma whispered, "I do not know how to breathe in this reality." Sarah whispered back, "Then breathe 1 second at a time. That is enough. That is enough." Emma confronted Daniel that night, her voice sharp as shattered glass. She slammed the marriage certificate she found onto the table. Emma said, "Explain this." Daniel's face drained of color, hands shaking. He stammered, "I never meant for you to find it." Emma's voice cut the air. "You never meant for the truth to exist." His chest rose and fell like a man drowning. Daniel said, "I loved you both. I could not choose." Emma's laugh was hollow, bitter, almost cruel. She said, "Love does not divide like math, Daniel. It destroys." His silence was louder than his lies. Emma sat with Olivia in a quiet cafe corner, tension electric between them. Olivia's hands twisted a napkin until it tore. Olivia said, "I did not know about you until last year." Emma stared at her with blazing eyes, saying, "And yet you stayed." Olivia's lips quivered, guilt spilling into her gaze. She whispered, "I thought he would leave you," he promised. Emma shook her head slowly, her voice calm but filled with ice. Emma said, "We are both his victims, not rivals." The words hung heavy, and for the first time, Olivia's tears matched Emma's silence. Emma returned home alone, the house echoing with absence. She moved through each room as though searching for fragments of herself. The wedding photo on the wall mocked her with frozen smiles. Emma said, "That woman is gone." She lifted the frame, hands trembling, and placed it face down on the table. The air felt lighter, though sorrow still clung to her ribs. She whispered into the silence, "I will not carry his lies any longer." Outside, the rain began again, steady, cleansing, relentless. Emma stood at the window, watching the water wash the glass clean, wishing her heart could follow. Emma stood in the kitchen as Daniel entered, his face pale with dread. She said, "You lied to both of us, and tonight it ends." His eyes darted like a cornered animal. Daniel said, "Emma, I can fix this." Her laugh cut sharp. "You cannot fix years of betrayal with words." The air between them throbbed with fury and grief. The hum of the fridge became thunder in her ears. Emma's fists curled, but her voice stayed calm. "I want the truth, all of it right now." Daniel sank into the chair as though gravity betrayed him too. His silence screamed louder than any confession. She whispered, "Even silence is an answer." The confrontation erupted as Emma slammed a drawer shut, the crash echoing like a gunshot. Daniel said, "I never wanted to hurt you." Her voice snapped back, "You did it every day you lived 2 lives." His hands reached toward her, but she stepped back. Her heart burned, yet her gaze never wavered. Emma said, "You chose this deception. You chose to bury me in lies." Daniel's jaw clenched, his face twisted between shame and anger. Emma's words poured like fire. "You broke us, and now I will break the silence you hide behind." The room felt smaller with every heartbeat, the walls pressing in on their wall. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper that cut sharper than any scream. She said, "I know about the second marriage." Daniel staggered back, his lips parted, but no words came. His silence was a confession heavier than stone. Emma's breath shook, yet her resolve hardened. She said, "You swore vows to me, and you shattered them while swearing the same to her." He pressed his palm to his forehead, muttering, "I could not choose." Emma's face hardened. "You already did. You chose yourself." Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away. The truth had burned away every illusion, leaving only ash and steel. The storm inside the house matched the storm outside. Thunder rattled the windows, while Emma and Daniel stood locked in standoff. Emma said, "You are a coward, hiding in 2 lives." Daniel's voice cracked, "I loved you both." Her fury erupted. "Love does not fracture, Daniel. It consumes, or it is nothing." Rain hammered the glass like a relentless drum. His shoulders collapsed as if crushed by invisible weight. Emma turned toward the door, her hand trembling but firm. She whispered, "You do not get to write the ending of my story." The storm howled, but her voice steadied, her strength carved from ruin. Emma walked into the bedroom, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her spirit refusing to bow. She opened the closet and pulled out a suitcase, the zipper screeching like a war cry. Daniel's voice broke from the hall, "Please don't leave." Emma's hands packed with fierce purpose, shirts folded with iron steadiness. She said, "I already left the moment you chose another life." Her voice held no tears, only clarity carved from pain. She closed the suitcase with a decisive click. The air in the room shifted, no longer suffocating but charged with freedom. She whispered to herself, "This is the beginning, not the end." Emma sat across from a stack of papers that felt heavier than stone. The room smelled of paper, ink, and endings. She ran a finger down the first page and steadied her breath. Emma said, "I am choosing the truth over the past." The pen waited like a key she finally earned. Outside, traffic hummed a rhythm that matched her pulse. She pictured the years she lost and the years she could claim. Emma said, "No more hiding under someone else's shadow." The words tasted like iron and light. She signed with a hand that trembled, then grew calm. The signature looked like a door swinging open. Quiet gathered around her and did not feel empty. The cafe chose a quiet corner for hard words. Maya arrived with eyes that carried storms and lullabies. Emma said, "I asked you here to set boundaries, not to reopen wounds." Maya's shoulders lowered, as if unburdening a stone. She whispered, "He told me half-truths, and I believed everyone." Emma folded her hands to keep them steady. Emma said, "The child is innocent and will never be a weapon." Relief softened the edges of Maya's fear. She nodded and said, "I will protect the calm he needs." Their silence felt like a truce drawn with careful lines. They both stared at the door that he once used to enter. Boxes lined the hallway, like sentences waiting for a period. Sarah carried one while laughing at its stubborn weight. Sarah said, "We lift together or not at all." Emma smiled for the first time in days, and it did not break. The new apartment smelled of fresh paint and second chances. They placed a plant on the sill like a flag. Emma said, "I will learn how to be quiet without being afraid." Sarah squeezed her shoulder and nodded. The echo in the room sounded friendly, not vacant. Sunset warmed the walls and made the boxes look lighter. Emma whispered, "This is mine," and the room agreed. Evening arrived like a soft verdict. Emma cooked pasta and let the water roar, and then hush. She dialed and waited until the line clicked. Olivia said, "Are you all right?" Emma let the question sit before answering. Emma said, "I am not all right, but I am honest, and that is enough tonight." The pot steamed the window into fog. Olivia's voice lowered, gentle but clear. Olivia said, "Truth hurts first and heals later." Emma leaned on the counter and closed her eyes. She said, "Thank you for saying what no one wanted to hear." Steam thinned and the glass cleared. The city lights winked like small promises. Morning sharpened the air into clarity. Emma stood on the courthouse steps with a folder pressed to her chest. She stared at the doors and pictured herself walking out lighter. Emma said, "I honor what was true and release what was not." The guard nodded as if he had heard this vow before. Inside, signatures stacked like stepping stones across a river. She crossed them without slipping. Outside again, sunlight fell clean across her face. Emma said, "I am the author now." Wind lifted her hair, and then let it fall. She took the first unborrowed breath of her new life. Emma walked along the riverbank where the city lights shimmered like scattered glass. The air was crisp and filled with the hum of late-night traffic. She whispered, "I survived the storm." Her reflection wavered on the water, fragile but whole. Each step felt like a page turning. Her chest no longer clenched with every breath. She closed her eyes and let the night hold her. She was no longer someone's secret, no longer someone's shadow. Emma said, "I am my own beginning." The words floated into the dark and stayed there, steady as the current. Emma sat in her new apartment, boxes half unpacked, a single lamp glowing. She sipped tea, hands steady for the first time in weeks. The silence was gentle, not punishing. She whispered, "This is mine." A small smile touched her lips as she placed a framed photo of herself and Sarah on the shelf. It was not the past she expected, but it was a future she chose. The room hummed with quiet strength, each object a declaration of survival. She leaned back and exhaled deeply, as if the walls themselves sighed with her. Daniel called that night, his voice heavy with regret. She stared at the phone, screen glowing in the dark. The silence stretched as his name blinked. Emma said softly, "Not anymore." She let the call fade into nothing. Her pulse steadied, her jaw strong. She turned off the phone and set it face down. For the first time, his voice no longer dictated her breath. The quiet afterward felt like freedom wrapped in steel. She whispered into the darkness, "I choose me." Emma met Sarah the next morning at the corner cafe. The smell of fresh bread filled the air, and sunlight poured across the wooden tables. Sarah said, "You look lighter." Emma laughed softly, "Because I am." They shared coffee, their conversation a balm over open wounds. Emma said, "Pain carved me, but it did not end me." Sarah touched her hand and smiled. The cafe buzzed with voices, but their corner felt safe. Emma knew she was not alone, and that truth was enough. That evening, Emma stood at her window as the sun sank into fire across the skyline. She pressed her palm against the glass, feeling the warmth of light even as it faded. She whispered, "I am not broken, I am free." The horizon burned in hues of orange and violet, promising both endings and beginnings. She did not know what tomorrow held, but she knew who she was. The last of the sun kissed her face as she whispered again, "I survived." The words were both an ending and a vow.